Chapter 4. The sails caught the wind, driving Vanguard forward. "Glorious, Black Star, is it not?" King Whitsun said. The three-masted ship moved out of the bay, beyond Dobble's Point, and out into the wide lake. The king and Fleck stood on the command deck, a raised platform high above which flew Whitsun's standard, a red diamond surrounded by lines of gold, blue, and green. It was his own variation on the red diamond theme of so many kings in the long history of Golden Coast. "It's a lovely ship, Your Majesty," Fleck said. "If I may say so, it seems an improvement over the old flagship." "It is, true enough," the king said, grinning wide. "The waves were terrific on the sea, so there's far less to worry about here. But it's a grander boat for certain. How it glides along!" "Will Your Majesty excuse me?" Fleck asked, bowing quickly. The king nodded, and Fleck hurried down the short ladder to the main deck. "Gavin!" he shouted. "What are you doing?" The startled rabbit turned, saw his captain, saluted, and looked around nervously. Nothing, sir." "Then what are you not doing?" Fleck asked, his face hard set.
"I don't know, sir,"
Gavin said, looking back and forth for salvation. "Your duty, Buck," Fleck shouted. "This is the king's ship. You are a subject, and you are in Black Star Company. What does it mean to be in this company?"
"We protect the king and all that the king loves,"
Gavin called back, his voice cracking. "What is our vow?" Fleck asked, raising his voice. "To the king and to each other." Then all rabbits marked with a black star shouted in unison, "My place beside you, my blood for yours." The sailors had continued their work during this confrontation, at least pretending not to watch. But as Black Star Company shouted their vow, they all stopped, stood a little taller, and watched openly. The soldiers did the same, and the king himself came to the rail and watched. No one spoke. Fleck quickly stepped closer to Gavin. King Whitsun frowned. Fleck's hands shot out toward Gavin, and a loud gasp sounded from every watching rabbit. The hand stopped and wrapped behind Gavin's neck, pulling his head gently to Fleck's own, so that their foreheads touched. "My place beside you, my blood for yours. We are in this together, my friend. As you are bound to me, I am bound to you. So long as you remain loyal to the king, I am loyal to you. I am on your side. I am a brother to you. Understand?" "Understood, sir," Gavin whispered. "Good," Fleck said, pointing to the sword at Gavin's side. "Remember your duty. We may find pleasure in our duty, but our duty is not our own pleasure." Fleck turned and walked back toward the command deck as the ship came to life again. Gavin sprang into action. He reported to Galt and, hearing his instruction, disappeared below deck to sort the supplies along with Massey and K-Jack. "My apologies, Your Majesty," Fleck said, returning to his side on the command deck. "You are harsh, Captain Blackstar," King Whitsun said, "but also tender." "I would be happy to take either orders or suggestions, Your Majesty, on how to lead young bucks most effectively," Fleck said. "I seek vigilance above all else. It keeps rabbits alive in the mines and, I believe, on the battlefield. I want my bucks prepared for both." "Carry on, Captain," King Whitsun said, smiling as Vanguard cut through the low waves, sending up a spray. "I haven't been this happy in a long time. I shall have to bring Lander next time." Fleck frowned, looking from the king to the Black Mountains ahead. When they drew near to the other side of Amon Lake, King Whitsun commanded the mainsails be taken in and the anchor heaved over. "I'll be nearby, Captain," Whitsun said. "I shall take Vanguard to explore the mouth of the West River, but I won't be long. I can always explore it further when we have our mine working." "I hope so, Your Majesty," Fleck said, bowing. "Good luck, Black Star," Whitsun said. "I'll be back for you soon." Fleck led his company over the side, into the shallow water, and then onto the pebbled shore. The soldiers followed behind. "Be alert, Bucks," Fleck said, eyes on the tangled trees ahead. "We're tight enough to play music on," Galt said, and a few of the bucks laughed. "I hope it isn't a tragic ballad played on our bones," Fleck said. Galt lowered his voice. "Try not to overwhelm us with your optimism, Fleck." Then louder to the company he said, "Stay sharp, lads." Fleck smiled, but he never took his eyes off the thick band of trees and brush ahead. Beyond, the foothills rose steadily to those impossibly high mountains in the distance, their craggy black peaks wreathed in mist. The fog seemed to swoop down into the foothills like a gliding ghost. "Bows at the ready," Fleck said. Instantly, 5 of the rabbits drew bows and nocked arrows. They had practiced these commands over and over, and Fleck was secretly pleased at how quickly the 5 with bows, including young Gavin, had acted. The soldiers behind Black Star Company looked at each other, nodding approval and showing some surprise. Their leader, Captain Vance, moved up beside Fleck. "Your rabbits are impressive, Captain." "Thank you, Captain Vance," Fleck answered. "That means a lot." "We are charged with following your lead, so if you need me, call out. Otherwise, I'll lead my bucks behind you in a covering position." "Thank you, Captain," Fleck said. "If things go badly, we will rely upon your leadership and experience." "What do you expect to happen?" Vance asked, his eyebrows raised. "Anything." Chapter 5. Fleck was prepared for anything, but for a long time what happened was nothing. Black Star Company and its attendant soldiers reached the foothills without incident. Lugging pickaxes and packs, and with weapons ready, they trudged through the thick forest. In a few hours of tracking back and forth, they found what both Fleck and Galt believed to be a prime spot for a potential mine. Fog draped the trees surrounding a small clearing at the base of a mossy hillside. "It might be coal," Galt said. "I wish our fathers were here." "Me too, and for more than this," Fleck said. "But I agree." He turned to a large brown rabbit with a massive pickaxe slung over his shoulder. "What do you say, Burnley?" "I agree with you both," he said, scanning the ground and the rocky hillside. "It might be coal. If a few of us can dig a bit, I think we may know more in a few hours." "That we will," Fleck said, motioning for the 4 rabbits who had borne pickaxes to come forward. They took off their other gear, laying their swords and packs aside. Following Burnley's lead, they moved toward strategic positions. "Hold on," Fleck said, crossing to where a younger rabbit, Massey, held a pickaxe poised. Smiling, Fleck extended his open hand. Massey handed him the pickaxe. They set to work. Fleck grinned, gaining as much pleasure from the digging as King Whitson had from sailing on the lake. He threw himself into the work. All the preparation, the defensive drilling, and their part in building the ship, it was all for this. After an hour, they had all taken turns tearing into the hillside. Fleck consulted with Burnley and Galt as the younger rabbits dug on. "We look to you, Burnley," Fleck said. "Should we carry on here, blast a hole, or find another site with promise?" "You're the captain, Fleck," Burnley said, "and it doesn't bother me, even if I'm older. Your dad always said you had a head for mining." "What, hard and dark?" Galt said. "Or likely to ignite, perhaps." "Thank you, Burnley," Fleck said, smiling at Galt. "I will take responsibility for the decision, but I want your honest opinion on this. You have the most experience. Do you think we'll find anything here?" Burnley looked at each hole, back up at the mountains, then at Fleck. "I do, Fleck. I'd carry on here if it were me in charge." "Right," Fleck said. He nodded to Galt. Galt nodded back and returned to the digging rabbits. "We carry on, lads," he shouted. "There's something below. We just have to find it. This ain't bucks picking up pebbles. We're miners. And we go below the earth. If your face ain't murky, you ain't doing worky." The morning passed. As noon came, Fleck explained their decision to Captain Vance, whose soldiers sat beneath a tree as the mist gathered in the trees around them. Then he walked back to the site. He relieved Gavin, jumping into the hole and happily laying into the wall of packed earth and rock. "You're doing well, Gavin," Fleck called back as Gavin scrambled out of the hole. "I'm proud of you." Gavin tried not to smile, but failed. "Thank you, Captain." The fog hung heavy, with shafts of light breaking through in hazy pillars. The air was full of the ring and shatter of pickaxes on stone. Still, everyone heard Galt cry out, "I've hit on something!" They all stopped, and it grew suddenly quiet. They gathered around Galt's sight, and Fleck alongside Burnley examined what Galt held in his hands. "Bring some water, Gavin," Fleck said, and the buck eagerly retrieved some. Everyone was smiling now. Fleck poured the water over the fistful Galt held, revealing something black and hard. Silence fell, and even the soldiers were roused from their apathy to meander over and huddle around the sight. "More water, Gavin," Fleck said, as Galt lifted the lump to what sunlight could be found. He examined it intently. "There's a seam in here," Massey said, pointing to the wall of the shaft Galt had been digging. Fleck nodded. "Do we have a mine?" Captain Vance asked eagerly. And all waited for Fleck's verdict. Fleck looked at Burnley with a questioning smile. A wild and eerie whine invaded the silence. Loud and high, it seemed to ride along the beams of light that split the fog. The rabbits tensed. No one moved. "What in the—" Gavin began, but Fleck silenced him with a look. A tense silence loomed. Just when they thought the silence would not be broken, it came again, louder. A screeching horror. Fleck's hand went to his sword. Chapter 6. This noise wasn't a howl, the sound that so terrified them and haunted their memories of the last days of Golden Coast. This was different. Fleck held up a hand for silence, needlessly now, for everyone was still. The piercing call seemed to ripple inside him, to brew steady terror in his guts. He didn't like to admit it, but he was almost paralyzed with fear. "It's only the wind," Captain Vance whispered, a question. "Stations," Fleck commanded, keeping his voice as calm as possible. He moved then, obeying his own charge, to the edge of the fog. Alongside him stood Galt, his recovered sword poised in his filthy hands. The excitement of their discovery was forgotten, replaced by a creeping dread. On the other side of the small clearing, the guards readied bows, swords, and pikes. Shields were lifted from the wet grass. Whispered orders from Captain Vance relayed. Fleck's rabbits were at least as efficient. Gavin and Massey had resumed their bows, while Burnley stood beside them with his large pickaxe ready. The sound came again, a chilling rise and fall of high, grating music. It seemed to carry on the slight wind, then fall away. It was hard to tell where it came from. Fleck peered into the fog, squinting hard. The rabbits stepped back and forth, looked from side to side. Some of the younger rabbits moaned softly, a worried whimper escaping their mouths. "Where is it coming from?" Galt whispered. "I can't tell," Fleck answered. "It feels like it's all around us." Then they heard another sound, low and close. "That's not the wind," Burnley muttered, choking up on his pickaxe. "Steady," Fleck said. "Circle out." Black Star Company turned out, facing the fog. Gavin and Massey stood together, bows ready. Kajak and Breffin stood side by side, hands shaking. Hollis and Burnley faced the foggy terror nearby. Galt stood with Fleck. The soldiers did something similar, completing a circle that surrounded the clearing. The brush bulged with fog, and they gazed into it, eyes wide and weapons ready. The shrieking ball sounded again, large and loud and all around them. The low sound of thrashing grew louder, nearer. In front of Fleck, the forest leaves and branches bobbed as the hurried crashing came ever closer. He raised his sword. "Here!" Galt called. The circled rabbits turned to face Fleck's side. Gavin's eyes widened in terror, and he bent his bow, fingers shaking as they gripped his nocked arrow. Massey cursed and raised his own bow with a jerk. Burnley surged forward. "Keep your places!" Fleck shouted, and Burnley retreated. "Hold the circle!" More baneful calls, louder and closer. Fleck glanced back at Gavin and Massey, then blinked. Fog and brush rippled as heavy footfalls sounded. Closer. Closer. A figure burst through the fog. Fleck was already moving. He lunged. Gavin, seeing the sudden break in the fog, let go his arrow. Fleck heard the flick of the arrow as he crashed into the intruder, sending him toppling to the ground. Fleck stood where the invader had been. The speeding arrow found him instead. Fleck reeled, falling in a wild spin on top of the intruder he had replaced. "Hold!" Galt called, a furious backward glance at Gavin. He rushed to Fleck, rolling him off the intruder. King Whitson. It was the king who'd come crashing in. Fleck had saved him. "Are you okay, Blackstar?" King Whitson asked urgently. He took Fleck's motionless face in his hands. "Come on, Captain!" Burnley came, examining the wound as others looked for signs of life. "He is alive," Galt said, feeling his pulse. "How's the wound?" "It's deep, close to his heart. Burnley answered.
We need to get him out of here, fast.
Gavin began to whine, tears starting in his eyes. He moved slowly toward Fleck. Seeing the wound and the blood that soaked Captain Blackstar's side, arm, and shoulder, he staggered. Then he ran like mad for the woods. Massey tackled him before he could escape the clearing. The eerie cry came again, but not so loudly this time. Still, the startled rabbits ducked and spun around, trying to find the source.
"Don't run, Gavin," Massey shouted. "The captain will be all right and we'll make it. We have to stick together." "I've killed him," Gavin shouted. "You haven't killed him," Captain Vance said. "But you might kill us all if you don't quit shouting." He examined Fleck's wound and looked to Fleck's face. "Your Majesty," he said, "we need to get back to Vanguard." "Of course," King Whitson said. "I was coming to find you when I heard that noise." He looked up. 4 or 5 of you, Burnley, you for sure, carry Captain Blackstar. The rest form up and defend. We make for the boat with all speed. Follow me." Captain Vance placed his rabbits, and Galt grabbed Gavin. "Let's go," he whispered, an angry edge to his voice. They followed the king and Captain Vance, moving quickly, though many were exhausted. Gavin's eyes were wide, darting from Massey to Galt to the foggy wood. Massey nodded to him and kept close. "You can't leave, Gavin," Massey whispered. "It's treason to leave when the king's in need, and you'd really be abandoning the captain then. It will be all right. Just hang on a little longer." But when Gavin met Galt's eyes, he saw in them the loathing he knew he deserved. Galt's teeth were clenched, his fury only just buried beneath a vigilant, searching stare. Gavin was trembling. Massey struggled to keep near him and to stay alert on the march back. They made the shoreline at last and plunged into the water. Some of the hands came to meet them and helped hoist Fleck on board. Massey joined them. Gavin moved nervously forward to help. Galt stepped between him and Fleck, a look of contempt plain on his face. Gavin stepped back slowly, his head down. He turned toward the shore and ran. Finding the tree line, he disappeared into the fog. "Gavin!" Massey shouted. "Come back!"
I'll find him,
Burnley called, breaking from the shallows and running onto the shore. Massey followed hard behind him.
"Come back," Galt ordered. "It's too dangerous. We must get the king and Fleck back to Settledon."
Burnley looked to the trees and back to Galt and the ship.
"He's right," Captain Vance said. "We have to go, Your Majesty, please."
Whitson's face told of his frustrated anger. He looked at the 2 rabbits on shore and shook his head.
"Come back," he said. "We can't help Gavin now."
They hurried back, heads hung and hearts heavy, and boarded Vanguard. King Whitson ordered the ship's hands to raise the anchor and make all possible sail. He paced the command deck, eyes on the shoreline.
"See that Captain Blackstar is comfortable," he ordered his steward. "Bring the miners and soldiers food and drink." "Aye, Your Majesty," the steward said. "And raise the grey pennant so they know ashore that something's wrong." "Aye, sir."
The passage home across the lake was heavy with woe. Galt looked back across the water to their landing spot and watched the fog roll onto the shore and creep across the lake. They were far beyond it now, but a different mist hung about every heart on board. It was heavy as a shroud. Massey wept. Chapter 7. 2 weeks later, King Whitson came to Captain Blackstar's tent. He found Fleck sitting up and reading. "I'm told you're much better, Captain," he said. "I am, Your Majesty," Fleck said, leaving the bed to bow on one knee. "How is your wound?" "Much improved," Fleck said, rolling his arm slowly. "It's only a small injury." "Come now, Blackstar, I'm no fool," Whitson said. "It was very near your heart. Dr. Grimes said you're fortunate to still be among us. She says it's quite rare to survive a bow shot like that from such close range." "I suppose I'm hard to kill," Fleck said, getting to his feet with a wince. "That may come in handy." "It may indeed," Whitson said. "Thank you, Captain. Thank you for stepping in my place. Whatever it was that made that noise." He trailed off, shaking his head. "My place is beside you, my lord, come what may." "I hoped you would say that, because there's more work to do." "I haven't been able to speak with my bucks, sir." "That was by my order, Captain," the king said. "In consultation with Dr. Grimes, I decided to let you truly rest. but she assures me you are recovered enough to resume command."
"You don't mean to disband us, then?"
"No, I have something else in mind," he said, glancing to the corner where Fleck's jacket, the one with the black star patch, hung. "Get dressed and follow me." Fleck dressed quickly, pulling on his jacket at the last. His wound was tight, and it ached to extend his arm too much, but he was grateful to be allowed to leave, and so he said nothing. In a few moments he followed the king outside. It was the first time he'd been allowed out since his injury. He had been told very little during his recovery, and nothing about Gavin. "Your bucks are working hard under Lieutenant Galt, but I'm afraid I have some bad news," the king said. He proceeded to tell him all that had happened after he was shot and fell unconscious. Fleck was furious. "Has nothing been done for the buck?" he asked. "I made him a promise." "We have done far more than nothing," the king said. They crossed a walkway and moved through a field heavy with wheat toward the lakeshore. "As I said, your bucks are drilling daily with Galt, and they've been helping my crews with another project." They left the field and mounted a platform that overlooked the lake and the near shore. In the bay were 3 ships, Vanguard and 2 more. "3?" Fleck said, astonished. "2 more finished?" "Almost," the king said, smiling. "In a few days we'll be ready to return to the far side of the lake and search for Gavin. We can also begin work on the mine, and I will explore the delta." "But the uncanny sound we heard, my lord?" Fleck asked. "I have been at it with my council for almost the entire time you've been recovering. I believe we need to return in force to see what is there. I want to own this lake. I want to be its master and find its farthest border. I want to know if there is actually passage west as I believe. I want to begin the mine and give you time to search for Gavin." "May we go without you, your majesty?" Fleck asked. "It's very dangerous." King Whitson shook his head and laughed. "There is no chance of that." Fleck found his bucks helping on the 3rd ship, Galt commanding, and Burnley assisting him. They climbed down the ladders and gathered around him on the shore, each one delighted to see him well at last. They shook his hand, patted his back, and gave him short, nodding bows. "Welcome back," they said. "Have a good rest?" one asked. They laughed and fairly overwhelmed him with their rousing welcome. All right," Galt called. "Give the rabbit room to breathe. He's not back from the dead." But he didn't follow his own advice. He hooked an arm around his old friend, nearly dragging him into the water. "I see you've been left in the charge of a mad buck," Fleck said, shoving Galt away playfully. "You've done well," he said, looking at the ships. "They're even bigger than Vanguard."
"I mean to be ready, Fleck,"
Burnley said.
"I don't mean to be caught off guard again."
"The large one will be the new flagship," Massey explained. "It's called Lily." "And the last?" Fleck asked.
"Natalia," Massey said. "Our way to a new world."
The week wore on, and the vigilance Fleck had always called for was now a matter of course for all the rabbits in the king's service. As he recovered his strength, he worked on the boats, giving orders and drilling the bucks. In the early days of Black Star Company, before the fateful first voyage, Fleck had always ended each exercise by reciting the vow. When that time came on his first day back, the rabbits were reluctant, awkward. It was clear that Galt had not continued this rite during Fleck's absence. As their drills ended, they began to break up and walk off. "The vow!" Fleck shouted, and he drew his sword. They slowly reformed and raised their swords, Galt last of all. "My place beside you! My blood for yours!" they called, though less enthusiastic than in the past. "I know, Bucks," Fleck said. "I know we all feel we let Gavin down." "You saved him from killing the king," Massey said, his head down. "You haven't let us down. We've let you and Gavin down." "I'm alive because of you, Massey," Fleck said, his hand absently finding his wound. "I'm alive because of you, Burnley, you, K-Jack, and you, Lieutenant Galt." He looked at each of them as he spoke their names. Galt looked away. "I'm alive because you saved me, and you protected the king." He pointed across the water. "We go again, Bucks. We go again."